Well, hello there. Shaun and I are gathered here today to have a bit of a conversation on AI and automation and performance marketing. So, Shaun, why don't we get started? It'd be good to hear your perspective on sort of where we've been in performance marketing with respect to like automation. So I guess like from when you started to sort of where we are now, how have things changed, like high level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. Well, 15 years ago, the main focus of our industry was bid management. It was exact match keywords. It was segmentation, sometimes hyper-segmentation. Maybe you wanted campaigns segmented by state. Maybe you wanted them just segmented very tightly, different match types.
Gaps.
Yeah, exactly. Single keyword ad group. Gosh, I haven't heard that in a long time. But now things have really evolved with, Performance Max, AI, new bid signals. Once upon a time, we had just one conversion objective. It was just conversion. It wasn't even like lead, MQL, SQL. Granted, those were always in the business, but it never funneled into Google Ads like it does now, where you have like multiple different conversion actions. And really, now the job is all about making sure you have the best signal possible for Google it's both volume as well as quality.
Yeah. So I remember, like you said, we joked about single keyword ad groups. Like the idea was segment as much as possible and try to control Google as much as possible, like be fully in control. Like I think that was the idea, so that you could hyper measure things. You knew exactly which keyword, you knew exactly which landing page, you knew exactly what ad copy was showing. And now we have things like responsive search ads. We have, we don't really have modified broad match anymore. We have sort of like just kind of Google saying, trust me, bro. And so it could lead one to feel like we have less control. So what do you think about that whole idea of less control?
It's a really great question. On one hand, we do have less control. On the other hand, it's just really a different kind of control. I like what you said, just trust me, bro. That is kind of like Google nowadays. I do really miss modified broad match, where you could kind of define these 3 keywords and please go get me everything in that space. And Google's taken that from us. Exact match nowadays, you can get the wildest terms over there that back in the day potentially could match broad. They no longer show you your search terms. You get to see like 50-60% of your search terms. But where do you get control? Really, it's with your first party data now, and how you funnel that back into Google Ads and how you're leveraging your own data. That is now where the control is. And that brought us a lot closer to businesses, where once upon a time we were at an arm's length. And like I said, we had just one conversion. We fed that to the business. Life was good. Now we're like in the business. And that's really impacting things. And that's kind of where the control and influence sits nowadays.
The distance to the client or to the business, I think, is really interesting. Like, I think if you're in-house, you are already closer, to the business, to the sales team, to the financial metrics. But certainly from a consultant or a agency perspective, like we've had to get a lot closer. Like whether it's on the e-commerce side, you kind of become a business consultant because you have to, make sure we understand the margin. Sometimes our clients don't even fully understand that. And so we're saying like, okay, we're going to target this ROAS. We're going to say, okay, 420% because we know your margins. And so long as we're above 420, you guys are break even, or like you have a bit of profit. And that's really important these days because we're going to tell Google, hey, get us as many customers or as many conversions at this return on ad spend. And on the B2B side, we've had to go a lot deeper and understand, okay, what is an effective CPA? And I think that was valid before, but now that we're like programming Google from an AI and an automation perspective to get us as many qualified, leads from a certain, at a certain CPA, we need to make sure that they're quality. We need to be talking to the SDRs. We need to be making sure all the Salesforce data is correct, because it doesn't matter if you're getting those at a certain CPA if the hygiene of the data isn't right, if it's not pumping in correctly to Google. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of great points over there. Number one is just like you said, being close to the business and needing to be a good business consultant. I really feel like we have in many ways become business consultants, like you said, sometimes making models for the clients. One of the most important things is even recognizing an MQL isn't necessarily good enough. What's an MQL? MQL is a marketing qualified lead. Good question. It just means that the lead is the marketing team has defined this meets the necessary parameters to be treated by the marketing team and move through the sales cycle. It's not junk. Some companies could have some strict requirements. Some it could be a little bit more liberal. But yeah, so I would say as the industry has evolved, we went from just somebody filled out a form. Then it had to be the right demographic or profile to fill out the form. And now I would go even one step further, potentially also connected to the fact that the economy's a little bit stretched thin at the moment. It's money in the bank that matters. So a business can quickly switch from a growth mindset to a profitability mindset. And we want to make sure that we don't get swept away in that. We want to make sure we're constantly providing value and not just driving MQLs, but driving opportunities, driving sales, driving pipeline for the businesses. That has been another challenge. And when you funnel all that back into Google Ads, it's making sure you're giving Google the signals it needs. So it's not telling Google, hey, go catch every single Joe Schmo that wants to fill out this form. It's saying, please go capture everybody that matches these following criteria, record that, learn from that, and go look for those type of people.
Yeah, and I think the name of the game is the machine learning. And this is where AI and automation kind of come in. I think like historically, we may have been a little bit skeptical of, Google's, push towards automation. But I think if we get that signal right, it's sort of a black box, but it does do magic, right? Like I think like the more data that Google has, the more that it's able to learn where there aren't sort of like human knob twiddling that's involved, right? It's like I think historically we used to say, okay, the language would be like, okay, what's the best converting keyword to quality, right? Or campaign or ad copy, where you try to go back and say, okay, as long as we're piping this data, the campaign and the keyword and everything into Salesforce or into whatever CRM, when you got enough data, you could kind of make a human-led assumption that like, oh, the quality ones tend to be from these keyword modifiers and the non-quality. So then you would maybe, even though you get a lot of leads from a certain keyword, you might add it as a negative or reduce the bids because it was bringing lower quality leads. Is that still true? Or are we now saying, you know what? Let's just say these are good quality, these are not good quality. Like, how are we training Google to know? Is there still a sort of keyword approach? Or are we sort of letting Google figure it out based on what we say is good lead or bad lead based on what we're funneling in back to Google Ads or whatever platform?
Yeah, another good question. So I think one of the first important things to mention here is the magic word of depends. And you really need to A/B test everything. And we have run some tests that I didn't think would be so successful, and I was surprised. And we've run some other tests that I was very confident in that surprised us in a bad way. Unfortunately, you don't win every single test. So when it comes to keywords and signals, keywords are still important. You can also do a level of keyword targeting within Performance Max. It gets to be a question of how much do those influence the actual audience. We have looked at the analytics from GA4, and we've noticed the most random affinity audiences working on some campaigns. And we've launched some campaigns totally not related to, this is for e-commerce, totally not related to the niche, and have been wildly successful. How do you explain that? I'm not necessarily sure. So there's still data. You still have to follow that data. In the world of Performance Max, there's now scripts that really help you to extract the search terms.
Well, so let me ask you about that. So Performance Max, this is a new campaign type that's been around for a few years now. And, I think whereas people were skeptical at first, is like Google saying, again, trust me, bro, give me all your money and just don't worry. We'll do it on search. We'll do it on YouTube. We'll do it on, you can't even control on it. It seems like we're gaining a little bit more control over the last few years, but still it's sort of like throw this thing in a black box. Like it lends the question, I guess, two-part question, like how effective is Performance Max versus the originals? And two, if this is the movement, like are performance marketers going to have a job in the future? Why can't a marketing manager just kind of give it some keywords or our target ideal customer and just hit go with a budget? So it's interesting.
That's like the famous question. Will I have a job in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Without a doubt, we will have jobs. The question is going to be, what will it look like? For example, like I mentioned earlier, we're guardians of the signal. So that is finding out what is the best signal. There's still a lot of tech work behind it. I think if you look at performance marketing as somebody just doing keyword research, writing some ad copy and setting the bids and budgets, they might be out of a job. If you don't succeed to evolve, you might be out of a job. But really, is the signal requires monitoring. It requires somebody to be on top of it. It requires repair. I've worked with a lot of different businesses. Very rarely have I seen one where the signal doesn't break, maybe once a year. And it could take a little while to find that break.
At that point, we're sort of data hygienists or data analysts or troubleshooting technical issues. I mean, there's a lot of people skills involved in this, because I feel like we're in order to guard that signal, like they're not guarding the bid or just like twiddling knobs in a dark basement somewhere. There's a lot of stakeholder work, right? So you have to speak to the SDRs, you have to speak to marketing, you have to speak to IT dev, you need to speak to marketing in a bigger organization, like one of our large clients, talking to the BI team, right? Because it's all of that input and making sure it makes sense. And when it breaks, we need to make sure that we tell the platform, ignore the last 7 days, because it's going to train on that model, right? So we could break all of this wonderful learning that we have trained. And so there's a lot of, making sure everything's flowing properly and making sure that as the business evolves, that the signal and the learning and the data evolves with it. So I feel like in some ways, you have to wear many more hats as a performance marketer. And I think this is going to be true of everyone with AI. But you can't just do the same simple job that you once did. You probably are going to have to do 1.5 or 2x the types of things that you did prior, right? So if you weren't necessarily writing on copy, maybe you're leveraging LLMs to do that. If you weren't necessarily doing banners and design, maybe you're doing some of that. So talk us through, are we already seeing some of that?
Yeah, great question. It kind of reminds me, as performance marketers, we're not going as deep into the skills as we might have once upon a time. Exactly like you said, we're wearing more hats, we're going wider. So the use of LLMs and ChatGPT has been amazing for ad copywriting straight out the gate. And you can't just take what ChatGPT gives you. Even if you gave it the perfect prompt, it'll still give you something of imperfect quality. So you still need to have that extra eye that goes over it. But the ideas it comes up with, the time it saves is amazing. And as far as banner generation goes, there are AI banner generation tools that we're testing now, and the quality has been fantastic. The ability to iterate on the banners quickly, the ability to change messaging, it's been really powerful for our clients. And I'm sure there's landing page generation, which we don't use yet, but I'm sure could be around the corner.
Okay. I guess all this lends itself to sort of, is our profession doomed, right? I think there's a lot of scaremongering around AI, but I think it's probably more parallel to a lot of other information workers, where it's you probably will still have a job, but it's going to look very different. And I think our interfacing with AI and understanding the signals, because machine learning AI is only as good as the signals that are input. And if it's just sort of ingesting its own data, but if that data is not right, or it's produced by AI, that's not very helpful. So I feel like you will need a human interface to make sure that we can monitor all of those signals. In terms of a T-shaped marketer, we're not going as deep. The best, mathematician or the best copywriter or the best graphic designer, I feel like getting yourself 80% away there and leveraging tools and platform and the platform's own AI, I think in the next 2 to 3 years, that will be the primary role, if not already, for...
Yeah, with automated bids, you don't need the best mathematicians anymore. You don't need the very cream of the crop thanks to AI. That's doing the depth for you now. So now you do need to go wide, because that's what AI can't do. It can't go across the board and match the messaging across every platform and interface with the client and match those signals. You've got to be that independent.
There are situations, though, where I'd argue where, at least now, Google has a vested interest. There's a bit of a conflict of interest, right? So on brand, for example, as a specific example, sometimes switching to manual bidding works better. No? Or am I wrong?
I love manual bidding. There definitely is a use case for it, especially when it comes to your brand term. When the case is pretty clear cut, Google will take advantage of you if you let it. If your TCPA is way too high, Google will just raise up those bids. If you're doing target impression share on brand and you've got a lot of budget available, Google will spend it. I definitely believe, especially for branded search or something that's, fairly defined, manual bids could be the best. You put low bids for your brand, max impression share, really, there's still room for manual CPC. That's still a tool in the toolbox.
Anyways, thanks, Shaun. That was a cool chat about performance marketing, testing out our new platform here. We'll catch everybody later. See you soon.
Bye.